I'm Allison Cruz here in Amelia County in Jetersville, and I'm for the soil.
Welcome to another episode of For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and hey, just before we get to our podcast today, I'd like to say a quick thank you on behalf of all of the organizers of the recent Virginia Farm to Table Feast and Harvest celebration that was held in Dayton, Virginia at the end of October. We had a fabulous time. We had a lot of socializing going on. There was a lot of good food. We got to introduce the For the Soil puppets. We had the For the Soil trailer there. Just a lot going on. If you want to learn more about what happened at the Virginia Farm to Table Feast and Harvest celebration, just go to the website forthesoil.org. That's the digit forthesoil.org and click on blog. Now, let's get to today's podcast. Welcome to another episode of For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and joining me, Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. And Eric, if you would introduce our special guest today.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. We're very pleased to have Robin Buzz Kloot with us from the University of South Carolina. Buzz is a research associate professor within the Arnold School of Public Health and the Department of Environmental Health Sciences. And Buzz has worked in Virginia, conducted a number of video series, and also brings a background in chemical engineering and mining engineering. And I believe, Buzz, you're originally from Namibia. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yes, and
nobody knows where that is. But it's just north of
say it's
South
probably
Africa.
East of Richmond somewhere, right?
Well, that's a good guess.
Yeah. Buzz, if you could just give us a little bit of background, and you've had between your engineering background and then you've last part of your career really been active with soil health and video making.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Tell us a little bit more.
Well, just to go back to my original career, I studied chemical engineering at the University of Cape Town and then spent 12 years on a uranium mine in Namibia, which is on the west coast of Africa. So it's south of Angola, north of South Africa, and then on the extreme west coast, very desert-like country. And I married an American woman, and we had 3 kids there, and we came over to the States in 1996. I felt like the mining industry for a chemical engineer had only so much in terms of career moves, apart from the fact it was grinding work. Of course, I came over here to find my fortune, did an MBA, tried to start a business, which really failed miserably, and then ended up working for a little organization within the university called Earth Sciences and Resources Institute, and eventually found myself having to manage projects, and out of necessity had to get a PhD. So I got a PhD in environmental health sciences, but specifically aquatic sciences. And after realizing that as an aquatic scientist, really all I was doing was, the equivalent of a coroner, determining the cause of death of a particular water body, I nearly left the university and, basically thought I'd become a barista. I had better interaction with human beings. And I met Ray Archuleta in 2010, and in the space of about 2 hours, he changed the course of my career, really talking about soils, and that, some of these conservation practices we had, well, they're not bad, but field borders, filter strips, things like holding ponds, those are all diaper practices that deal with the symptoms of the problem rather than the cause. And so he changed my perspective of, we don't have a runoff problem, we have an infiltration problem. the other thing he talked about was weeds. He said weeds are the ambulance workers of the land. They are there when we strip the soil bare, and they provide diversity and start catching sunlight and water again. So all of a sudden, my whole paradigm was changed. And remember, I had a chemical background. So everything I saw was in terms of these abstract ideas of chemistry. And when he started talking about soil biology, it really changed the course of my career, like I said. And in September of 2010, he invited me up to visit Dave Brandt's place in Ohio. And then we went up to Burleigh County in North Dakota, where we met with a number of producers. But I had an aha moment in the Burleigh County conservation districts. They had a demonstration plot, and they had some magnificent corn there that had zero fertilizer, zero nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and that was behind a 21-way mixed cover crop. And they I don't know how many bushels it was, but it really looked pretty darn good, and that changed the way I thought of things.
Buzz, I'm so interested by your background. And so you say you have a change, you changed your course, but I'm guessing you didn't leave that full chemical background behind. How have you brought that knowledge along on the soil health journey? We talk a lot about the biology in the soil, but we know that chemical, physical aspects are also a component.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer it completely. I think, one of the things I've been quoted as saying is that all soil tests are wrong, some are useful. And I made a few people mad about that, and now they quote me. But I think the idea is that possibly how I could possibly answer that was, in my chemical world, I thought that we could break everything down to chemistry. So crush it up, grind it up, put it through an ICP machine or a chromatography machine, and we'd get the answers. And I really had no concept of how chemistry and life interacted. So I think more than anything else, I've learned that I am ignorant and have had to have a beginner's mindset about just about everything. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where I feel. I felt that with a chemical background, I knew everything. And then suddenly when I met Ray, I realized I knew nothing.
Very well said. We're talking today with Dr. Buzz Kloot with the Arnold School of Public Health. He is with the University of South Carolina, and I suspect that many of our listeners, Buzz, they're going to be Googling or doing an internet search for your last name, and I'll go ahead and spell it for everybody. Kloot. It's Buzz, B-U-Z, Kloot. And I wanted to ask you about a documentary film that you were involved with. I believe it was with the USDA's NRCS several years ago. And by the way, for our listeners, that YouTube video, that video is on YouTube, the documentary film, and a very interesting title. It's called Undercover Farmers. And in that documentary, you talked about a paradigm shift that was taking place. And I had to go back and research the definition of paradigm shift. Okay, I'll admit to it. But what I found was a paradigm shift is a profound change in the fundamental framework or assumptions through which we understand or approach something. It's not just a tweak, it is a complete overhaul of the prevailing model. And in that documentary film, you said we are seeing a paradigm shift in soil science. Can you explain?
Boy, these are really easy questions to answer. I think what's happening, if you go to Dr. Ray Wild's book on the nature and property of soils, you'll see more and more references to soil biology. Whereas if you had a look at earlier, especially the seventh or eighth edition of at that time Niles Brady was the author. There was an acknowledgement that we cannot underestimate the role of soil biology, but the fact is that most soil scientists, especially podologists, had backgrounds in either chemistry or geology, and that goes back historically. We are seeing more and more the incorporation of soil biology and soil microbiology that was somewhat of a backwater in agriculture for many years. And we see this now taking hold. We see that in a lot of our graduating students. So people, again, looking at a paradigm, we can also look at our paradigm as in our filter in which we see the data. So you and I can look at the same data and we can see two different things. It goes into politics, it goes in theology, those two things that you don't want to talk about at the Thanksgiving table with your family, right? But it's the way you see the data, and we see that this is changing. So I've got a copy of Brady and Weil and Brady over here, the 15th edition, and I have little yellow sticky tabs where I see references to soil biology, and that is where we're going. Dr. Ray Weil himself said that somehow with the soil health revolution starting in places like Burleigh County, with Gabe Brown, people like Jay Fuhrer, they started doing this stuff. And what was happening is that all of a sudden the soil scientists and the agronomic researchers had to start catching up with what was happening in the field. Finally, in soil podology, what we're also seeing now in your regular soil survey, you'll see properties like organic matter, water holding capacity. And in the old days, you had essentially the idea that these things were inherent properties. Now you'll see the soil survey talking about dynamic properties of the soil, including soil organic matter. So we're seeing that shift at a fundamental level, and it's quite heartening to see. 10, 15 years ago, we were seen as pseudoscience, non-scientific, and really kind of booed out of any kind of discussion. We see a lot less of that, and part of this is trying to engage the public in these discussions.
And Buzz, you had mentioned how influential your meeting with Ray Archuleta with USDA NRCS was in 2010, and you had come to Virginia in 2014 to offer training on video making for sustainable agriculture. And can you also tell us about why you became so interested in sort of uplifting farmer stories and specifically creating videos?
You want the truth on that, Eric? You're talking about a guy who was a chemical engineer who became an aquatic scientist. So I wasn't about to dive in and become the expert on agronomy or soil science. I would have been laughed out of the room. But I had a really good friend, and her name is Amy Overstreet, and she's still, I believe, with the USDA. But she became my muse, and we produced a book together on resource inventory of South Carolina, I believe is what it was called. But she said, "Can you do video?" And I said, "Well, I can't do it now, but can you support me in doing that?" And that's where we started. One of the things, so we've been doing that, and we've probably done most of the body of work that I've been most involved in the last 10 years has been with South Dakota NRCS. And we have a brand called growingresilience.sd.com, which is our primary platform. And we have, somewhere around about 13 or 14,000 followers on Facebook. And then what we see is we have a growing audience of our podcasts, videos, and blogs on our blog post. And that's one of the platforms where we found most of the engagement. So I feel like as a non-expert and as a dilettante, somebody who pretends to know what he's talking about but doesn't, that's kind of where I find that I've had a niche. And rather than putting ourselves forward as experts, what we do is we speak to academics, practitioners, and then also especially farmers and ranchers. And with the credibility of all three of those, we are able to, I think, make some inroads.
Once again, we're talking with Dr. Buzz Kloot with the Arnold School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina. And Buzz, I'm going to ask you to hang on. If you've got the time, we'd like to do a second part of this episode and talk a little bit more at length. I've got some questions about classroom studies and students these days, how receptive they are to these paradigm shifts you're talking about in soil science. So we'd love to have you stick around for a part two. Can you do that?
Sure.
All right. Once again, our guest, Dr. Buzz Kloot with the Arnold School of Public Health with the University of South Carolina. And Mary and Eric will be back in the next one.
Thank you, Jeff and Buzz.
Thank you.
For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of The Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.